Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has tanker traffic surging in the Burrard Inlet.
Many British Columbians did not want this pipeline. Many British Columbians were concerned about the impacts on our environment.
That has BC pressuring Ottawa to update its plan to deal with a catastrophic oil spill. Plus, the province caps rent increases at 3% for 2025.
For a person who doesn't have money, I think it makes a big difference.
It's already up here, so if you're slowing that down, you need more housing.
It's a decrease from last year, but renters say they're still feeling the pinch. And the federal government will reduce the number of temporary foreign workers in this country.
We'll be looking at unemployment rates and opportunities to make further adjustments.
The restrictions Ottawa is bringing in and why the feds say they're needed now.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Ghoussoub. Thanks for joining us. The BC government wants Ottawa to update its emergency response plans in the event of a catastrophic oil spill. The calls come as oil tanker traffic has increased substantially in the Burrard Inlet. And as John Hernandez explains, oil exports are surging in the wake of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion.
For years, you'd only see about 2 oil tankers pass through the Burrard Inlet each month. But for both June and July, that number jumped to 20.
And so far in August, the rate has been about the same.
This professor has been tracking the numbers, which have also been confirmed by the federally owned Trans Mountain.
So it's a very sudden change, which of course is to be expected because there's an awful lot more oil can be sent down the pipe.
The tenfold increase comes after the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion finally went online back in May, tripling the transport of oil from Alberta to the BC coast.
Now it's not a proposed threat, it's an active threat.
The increase in tanker traffic, a sore spot for many opponents like Tim Tuccaro, who continue to raise concerns over what might happen if there's an oil spill.
We know from analyses of Transport Canada that if there is an oil spill, that an evacuation is almost certainly to be required because this is extremely toxic material.
A federally run marine response team is on hand in the event of a spill, which includes 200 responders equipped with 80 vessels. But provincial officials say its response plan is outdated. BC's Environment Minister says it was penned 3 years ago and times have changed.
Marine response plans need to be updated on a regular basis. Conditions change. We know the climate is changing. That can potentially have an impact. We have more knowledge every year.
The province is calling on Ottawa for an updated spill response plan as more and more tankers enter these waters.
Spills have happened, and they quite possibly will continue to happen. And we need to be ready, but we need to know what the elements of the plan are.
CBC News has reached out to regulator Transport Canada for comment. Meanwhile, Heyman says he wants less tanker traffic until there's a new spill response procedure. That decision is up to Ottawa, which has already invested more than $36 billion into this mega project. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
The province says landlords will not be able to increase rents by more than 3% in 2025. As Mira Baines explains, the change is tied to inflation and will take effect January 1st.
A mixed reaction from renters in Vancouver to today's rent cap announcement from the BC government.
It does count, but I mean, it's very little. Yeah. It's very little.
For a person who doesn't have money, I think it makes a big difference, right? But I think it's actually quite reasonable. It's cost of living increase, basically the inflation level.
But at least they're finally trying to stop it, because I had some lords back in the day raise the rent like $100 in 1 year. And I was evicted before over $40.
It's already up here, so if you're slowing that down, you need more housing. You need to get to the root of it.
I think rent control is a good way to go. Stricter rent controls than what they're doing.
This graph shows a history of rent increases with a freeze in 2020 to 2021, and the allowable increase was below inflation in 2023 and 2024. The previous government's policy allowed for an additional 2% increase on top of inflation before 2018. Landlord BC says rent increase freezes during the pandemic and high interest rates have made it difficult for landlords to deal with taking on the cost of insurance, repairs, and property tax.
And it's not just the small mom and pop landlords, it's across the sector. It's very challenging times. We're encouraged by the fact that interest rates might finally start coming down because we're, highly sensitive to the high cost of money.
If landlords do choose to raise rent, they must provide a full 3 months' notice to tenants according to the Residential Tenancy Act in province. The 3% cap does not apply to co-ops, commercial leases, and some assisted living facilities. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
The federal government is reducing the number of low-wage temporary foreign workers in Canada after relaxed restrictions post-COVID resulted in a historic surge. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says by fall this year they will be reviewing other policies as well.
Over the next 90 days, we'll be looking at the higher wage streams of temporary workers, and we'll be looking at unemployment rates and opportunities to make further adjustments over the course of this fall as we come forward with comprehensive level plans that'll respond to the reality that Canada's facing now and in years and decades to come.
Areas with unemployment rates above 6% will not be able to hire low-wage foreign workers anymore, and employers will no longer be allowed to hire more than 10% of their total workforce through TFW programs. The workers will also be limited to one-year contracts. An immigration lawyer says the surge in the number of temporary foreign workers has caused high youth unemployment.
You either bite the bullet economically and get the knife to the throat for economic recovery, or open our gates to a huge number of foreigners who bring foreign capital. So the introduction of foreign capital to the Canadian economy is one side of the ledger, but Canadians pay the price to go without jobs for the other side of that ledger.
A new milestone in the Site C project, BC Hydro has started filling its reservoir. The utility says it will take between 2 and 4 months to fill the 83-kilometer length. It's one of the last steps before operations begin at the controversial dam project, 14 kilometers southwest of Fort St. John. They're also warning the public to stay away from the area for at least a year due to possible hazards on the site. The parking provider, Park and Fly, says 1 million customer files are being affected by a data breach. The company says an unauthorized third party breached its network from July 11th to 13th, but an investigation determined that no payment information was compromised. Park and Fly says personal information that was accessed may include names and basic contact information like email and mailing addresses. The company says it has taken steps to upgrade its network security and has told customers about the breach. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada says it's received a breach report but cannot provide any further details. And a huge tree fell on a house in Vancouver's Mount Pleasant neighborhood early Saturday morning.
I heard what sounded like a big batch of firecrackers followed by a huge boom and impact that shook the whole house. And then my wife yelling for me from downstairs and my kids screaming. And so I ran downstairs to see our front yard full of tree. A massive tree had come down and landed on our house.
Luckily, there were no reported injuries or any structural damage to the properties, but Environment Canada says rain combined with strong wind gusts could be a factor in what happened.
Especially during a time where the previous months have been generally dry, the concern becomes for trees. Drought-stricken trees are relatively weaker, so when you kind of add those impacts of heavy rain and stronger winds, it causes trees to fall down, branches to break, and possibly causing power outages as well.
which leads us to Darius Madavi, who is joining us now with a first look at the forecast. That was truly some wild weather this weekend.
Yes, a good excuse to stay inside and hang out on the couch. Right,
exactly
Michelle?
what I did.
Yeah. We got lots of rain over the weekend. This is Friday at noon into Saturday at noon, so about a 24-hour period. Now, most of that rain, though, for much of the lower mainland actually came in those overnight hours. Now, this is our rainfall totals from Friday evening into Saturday sort of midday, and you can see 81 millimeters at the most, but also, well, the most that was measured at a weather station, but some areas probably got more than that, at least a little bit more. Maple Ridge, 73 millimeters, White Rock, 51 millimeters, Abbotsford, 45, Chilliwack, 61. Lots of rainfall came in a fairly short period, 12 to 18 hours for most of these places. So lots of rain. Now, there is a little bit more on the way, but first, let's take a look at some of the other places around BC. The South Island, especially around Victoria, also got a decent dump of rain when that system rolled through. If we move over to parts of the interior, you'll also notice some thunderstorms that rolled up through there during that 24-hour period. We're not seeing the lightning on here because the data is too old at this point to pull it up, but you can see that wherever we have those red pockets, those yellow and red pockets, that's where we have downpours, usually associated with those thunderstorms. So we saw that in Kelowna, we saw it in Kamloops, and we also saw a different storm cell moving through over in the southeast. I want to highlight Invermere in particular because we have some footage, speaking of trees falling down. Take a look at this. This is somebody pulling into their garage, and then just seconds later, a tree falling down right behind them. So definitely, I'm glad I wasn't the one in the car there. I would have been a little bit more spooked than the person there seems. But also in Windermere, which is just south of Invermere, the name has probably rarely been more accurate than this. Some wind gusts knocking down those 3 pine trees planted over 20 years ago. So definitely some dramatic scenes across the province. And Michelle, there's still a little bit more excitement to come. We've seen that fire danger rating drop as a result of those storms, but the drought rating, we'll have to wait until Thursday to see if it'll budge. We got some precipitation on the way, and as a teaser for later this hour, maybe even some snow.
Wow. Dar, you'll be back later in the show with that.
Yes, thank you.
Well, residents in Karamios in BC's interior are up in arms after several trees in the area had their branches trimmed. As Saurabh Sandhu reports, they say some of the trees are historic and the extreme trimming has left them looking unsightly.
Several people who live in Karamios, a community about 80 kilometers south of Kelowna, have taken to social media to share photos of trees that were recently trimmed by a contractor for Fortis BC. The utility provides natural gas and electricity in the area. One resident is describing the work as a chainsaw massacre.
So many of the trees in the community literally are half gone. They basically took the entire roadside of a lot of trees, a lot of old trees, all through our parks and the edges of our parks on private property. It's a massacre. There's no other way to describe it.
He says some of the trees that had branches cut off are historic.
You've got trees that are 40, 50 easily years old, and they're sails now. They're half missing.
Fortis BC says the work is meant to keep the community safe, as trees too close to power lines can pose a fire risk and lead to outages. One expert we spoke to says utility tree trimming is routine and important to minimize risk.
In certain situations, it's better to have a brutal-looking tree versus no tree, because trees still sometimes they provide noise mitigation, they reduce pollutants that come off the highway, they do give some shade, maybe there's some birds' nests in there.
Residents say they are upset the natural gas company did not notify them ahead of time and worry pruning trees to such a degree could cause more problems in the future. Fortis BC says it notifies communities when trees need to be removed, but less often for tree trimming because of how commonplace it is. The company says the work in Karamios is ongoing, with no word yet on when it will be done. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Students going back to school next week will see new rules around cell phones. The province earlier mandated all 60 school districts to restrict cell phone use in classrooms. And as Pinky Wong explains, the move is intended to cut down on distractions and encourage safe social media use.
Students in elementary schools will have to keep personal digital devices out of sight for the whole school day. Secondary school students are not allowed to use cell phones during class unless permitted. Clint Johnson is the president of the BC Teachers Federation.
When it hits the ground in September, maybe we'll see a bit more, but right now we don't expect it to be too dissimilar, and our members are used to dealing with this issue, and many of them have come up with solutions.
Helen McGregor, the superintendent and CEO of the Vancouver School Board, says the board will work closely with all parties.
It is about education and it is about respect. And as we hear from students and families, educators in classrooms, I think we're going to learn some things about how we do this work together.
The board says students with medical or accessibility needs will be exempted from the restrictions. Pinky Wong, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Ironman triathlon to be held in BC wrapped up on Sunday in Penticton, the first Canadian city to host the race in the 80s. Since the 1980s, BC's Ryan Lalonde and Kylie Ackford were some of the first athletes to cross the finish line. More than 1,700 athletes took part in this year's event. The race usually consists of a 3.8-kilometer swim, a hilly 180-kilometer bike ride, and a 42.2-kilometer run. This year, the entire swim portion was canceled at the last minute because the water in Okanagan Lake was too cold.
Oh, today I heard the water temperature was like 9 or 10 degrees. That's really cold. And after being in the water for 40 minutes, your body gets to be a bit numb and you get hypothermic. And so I really believe that what they've done is a good thing, sadly as it is, but it's for the benefit of everybody involved.
Last month, Ironman Canada announced the race will move to Ottawa in 2025, marking the end of an era for a decades-long sporting tradition in Penticton. Required by employers, a burden on the healthcare system. After the break, we talk about when a doctor's note should be requested. With a change in the weather just around the corner, it'll soon be that time of year when it seems like everybody is getting sick. And most of the time, employers require their employees to provide evidence of that illness through doctor's notes. But doctors in BC have been speaking out against this requirement since 2014. And in February, BC Family Doctors created a template letter for employers to act as a sick note. The letter stated, due to the ongoing primary care crisis, these notes place a further burden on doctors. Today, we're joined by CBC Health columnist Dr. Melissa Lem. Melissa, thanks for being with us. In your view, when should an employer request a doctor's note from their employee?
Well, there's no hard and fast rule about when an employer should ask for one. It really depends on the kind of organization you work in and the relationship that you have with your employees. I do have to say, though, like most family doctors, I do write several sick notes every week, and I'm pleasantly surprised when I see a patient who says their employer doesn't ask them for doctor's notes. But in terms of when you shouldn't be asking for them, in 2022, BC introduced legislation guaranteeing 5 paid sick days per year for the majority of workers. So if your employees' sick days are staying within this 5-day limit and they don't seem to consistently need sick days around holidays or long weekends, which is unfair for other employees, you really shouldn't be asking for sick notes.
Okay, and what are some examples of illnesses where a doctor's note might actually be a good idea?
If you need a long absence from work for, say, more than a couple weeks, or if a doctor can really give meaningful clinical insight into your condition that'll help you return to work safely, a sick note might be appropriate. So some examples could be if you develop long-lasting symptoms after COVID and you have lower mental and physical capacity, so you need your work paused or reduced. Or if you have a job where you need to be on your feet a lot and you sprain your ankle on the weekend and need to be accommodated into a more sedentary job for a few weeks. I do want to say, though, that it's important to know your rights as an employee. Unless there's something in your contract saying that your employer can access your medical information, they don't have a right to it. They should only ask for information that's absolutely necessary with your consent.
I mean, what about COVID? We know it's still around. Is that something that's still spreading largely in workplaces?
Absolutely. So a lot of workplaces, even healthcare facilities, have now dropped their mandatory masking mandates. And so we are seeing spread within BC, and especially as we head back into the fall and people head indoors more, there is a risk of more spread of COVID.
And what about employees who don't have access to a family physician to get them that note? We know that's a huge issue here in BC.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's still hundreds of thousands of people in BC without a family doctor. And if you are one of those people, you can try getting a note from another kind of health professional, like a counselor or a pharmacist, or you can also try a virtual or in-person walk-in clinic. And if you are looking for a family doctor, it's always a good idea to register on BC's Health Connect registry online or via 811, so that when spaces come up in your community, you can be matched to a doctor or a nurse practitioner.
And you mentioned writing sick notes yourself. A BC Family Doctor said sick notes do place an unnecessary burden on a system that we know is strained. Do you agree that it's straining that system as well?
I do. Paperwork already eats up about 40% of our time, and we spend about 4 of those hours a week on sick notes and government medical forms. We could be seeing 20 more patients every week if we didn't have to do that kind of paperwork. We want to focus as family doctors on interventions that actually improve our patients' health instead of being a referee for employers. And Doctors of BC actually passed a new resolution in May calling on the provincial government to legislate an end to routine sick notes. And if or when that happens, we're going to see less burnout and better access to care for patients.
Dr. Melissa Lem, CBC Health columnist, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Still to come, after a year of dire polling for the Liberal government, Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet ministers say they're sticking by him. More on that story next. Prime Minister Trudeau is at the cabinet retreat in Halifax as his team strategizes about improving Liberal popularity before Parliament resumes. As CBC's Ashley Burke reports, he also made some new announcements today.
The Prime Minister and his cabinet are under pressure to show they can change and win back the public's trust.
The challenges we're facing are real. And we're not the only country facing these challenges, but we have to be better at it to make sure that we're delivering results, period.
After a year of the worst polling that Justin Trudeau has ever seen since becoming leader, he announced new initiatives on the first full day of this retreat.
I'm focused on making sure we're delivering.
Cracking down on a massive influx of temporary foreign workers that experts say fueled unemployment among immigrants and young people.
We are taking action. We are tightening the rules and restricting eligibility to reduce the number of low-wage temporary foreign workers in Canada, with exceptions in certain industries like healthcare, construction, and food security.
And taking aim at China for flooding the Canadian market with heavily subsidized electric vehicles. Now new punitive tariffs are coming in line with the U.S.
Chinese policy of oversupply and overcapacity built on. You know what it's built on? It is built on abysmal labor standards, and it is built on abysmal environmental standards.
The announcement's an attempt to turn the page from ongoing questions about Trudeau's leadership. He said he'll stay on, but the Conservatives say a change in government is what's needed.
After 9 years and multiple cabinet retreats, life is still going to be unaffordable in Canada, even after this one.
Some members of Liberal caucus are also hoping that this cabinet meeting leads to a major reset for the party, including a big cabinet shuffle. But so far, there are no signs of that happening. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Halifax.
Canada is taking action against China to prevent Beijing from flooding the market with electric vehicles. It's imposing new tariffs.
We will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles. We are transforming Canada's automotive sector to be a global leader in building the vehicles of tomorrow. But actors like China have chosen to give themselves an unfair advantage in the global marketplace, compromising the security of our critical industries and displacing dedicated Canadian autos and metal workers.
Trudeau also announced a 25% tariff on Chinese-made steel and aluminum. The tariff hikes follow a similar move by the U.S. In a statement, the Chinese embassy says it's expressing strong dissatisfaction and firm opposition to the tariffs. Most federal public servants will be adding an extra day at the office starting 2 weeks from now. Hybrid employees are now mandated to be at their workplace 3 days a week. And as Jocelyn Cheppel reports, reactions from workers are mixed.
Federal public service workers are divided on the change. While some say it'll cause unnecessary problems for them, others welcome the extra in-office day.
I have to now coordinate some of my personal aspects of my life and figure out how that's going to work. So, but you know, there's been somewhat sufficient notice on how that's going to go down.
Not everyone agrees with the switch. The backlash over the 3-day office mandate prompted several protests over the summer. Several unions say they weren't consulted and that the May announcement came as a shock. Critics say different departments have different needs.
It's at the detriment of not only workers in the federal public service, but it's at the detriment of the services that we provide to Canadians, because we've been able to prove that we're able to provide these services from remotely, sometimes more effectively, more productively than in the office.
The union says their members are sharing concerns about work-life balance and how they'll get to the office. Those in support say it'll increase productivity.
I can appreciate that change is difficult. I can appreciate how this impacts people individually. I think I would urge them to reflect on what it can mean to serve as a public servant, serve Canadians.
The government is encouraging managers to discuss the transition 2 weeks from now with employees to help identify any barriers that may need considering. Jocelyn Cheppel, CBC News, Ottawa.
The UN has halted humanitarian aid operations in Gaza today after Israel issued new evacuation orders for Deir al-Balah. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes continue across the territory. A medic in Gaza says 7 people were killed in the latest Israeli strikes. One of the territory's last functioning hospitals has been emptying out in recent days. It came after Israel signaled a possible ground operation for the town in central Gaza. It had been largely spared throughout the 10-month war between Israel and Hamas following the October 7th attacks. Israel has struck again in Lebanon today. It follows heavy exchanges of fire between Israel with Hezbollah over the weekend. Tensions in the region remain high, but as Sasha Petrusik reports, there are signs of a possible de-escalation.
Israel carried out an airstrike in southern Lebanon today, going after a Hamas militant. But it's nothing compared to what happened over the weekend when Israel launched more than 100 jets, which hit all kinds of rocket launch sites in southern Lebanon. They thwarted what was going to be an attack of more than 1,000 rockets by Hezbollah on Israel, going down as far as Tel Aviv. This is unusual, and it would have been the largest single attack since the war in Gaza began. The question now here is, will Hezbollah launch new attacks against northern Israel? Because yesterday they described what was happening as phase 1.
We will assess the outcome of the enemy's concealment of today's events. If the result is satisfactory and it achieves the intended goal, we will consider the response process to the assassination of Fuad Shukr complete. If it falls short in our view, we will reserve the right to respond at a later time.
Now, the fact that both sides consider it a victory is actually seen as a good thing. It means that it's less likely that either will want retribution or revenge, and therefore there's less of a chance of the same kind of fighting to break out all over again. Many say that the only way that there will be an actual solution to this is if there's a ceasefire deal for Gaza between Israel and Hamas.
It is incumbent on all parties in the region to work towards de-escalation and stability. And so we are feverishly working in Cairo as we speak with our team and the teams of the other mediators, as well as with the Israelis, to get to a ceasefire and hostage deal.
So this is what we're seeing happening on the ground, and all of the rest of this is actually attempting to either fix it, to come up with a ceasefire that ends all of this, or for one side or the other to prevail. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
At least 6 people are dead and many more injured in Ukraine after Russia launched one of its biggest attacks since the invasion. As Cameron McIntosh reports, some missiles and drones may have crossed into NATO airspace.
The barrage saw Russian missiles and drones strike at critical energy infrastructure across Ukraine, including this reservoir near Kyiv and this power plant. Ukraine says most regions in the country were hit, killing at least 6 people, injuring at least another 30. A farmer among those killed in a direct hit on his home. I was very scared from the explosion, says his sister. I was still shaking. I couldn't recognize there was black dust everywhere. In the capital of Kyiv, these residents waited out the attack by singing a song of resistance. The Ukrainian government says at least 120 missiles and 100 drones were fired. It managed to shoot some of them down, but authorities say there's enough damage to force rolling blackouts. The attack comes on the same day the Kremlin spoke of the need to respond to Ukraine's seizure of territory in western Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry says it targeted infrastructure critical to Ukraine's war effort, along with 2 electronic warfare stations and 4 field ammunition depots. But neighboring Poland, a NATO member says the Russian attack may have crossed into its airspace. These Polish soldiers searching for a Russian drone believed to have been shot down. We're conducting a search near the border so that there's no doubt here, said Poland's Deputy Minister of Defense. Unclear is how NATO may respond. U.S. President Joe Biden has repeatedly warned Russia against incursions into NATO territory. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling on the U.S. and European allies to help bolster Ukraine's long-range air defenses. In this statement posted to X, he also said Ukraine's efforts to eliminate Russian threats on Russian territory are vital to Ukraine's defense, again asking for permission to use NATO weapons to carry out those missions, a request that has so far gone unanswered. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Dozens of people are missing or dead after heavy rains caused a dam to burst in eastern Sudan. The dam is in a remote area, and the government says it has sent help to people who are stranded. A long-drawn civil war in Sudan means resources are going to the military rather than maintaining infrastructure. The fighting that began in April of last year has killed thousands of people, and more than 10 million have fled their homes. In the U.S., a rare but potentially deadly disease spread by mosquitoes has a cluster of communities in the state of Massachusetts on high alert tonight. Alison Northcott has more on that and the risk here at home.
Several towns in Massachusetts are now critical risk zones for a serious mosquito-borne illness.
I don't know if I wouldn't go out. I'd probably just wear long pants and long sleeves.
Communities across the U.S. state are trying to prevent the spread of eastern equine encephalitis after a rare case was reported in a man in his 80s.
Headache, a fever, but because of the inflammation of the brain, you can have a decreased level of consciousness and seizures.
Infectious disease specialists say it can be dangerous and deadly.
It's a pretty catastrophic infection. It can cause a very, very severe syndrome of encephalitis, which means inflammation of the brain, and it carries a rather high mortality rate.
Officials in Massachusetts are spraying widely, some towns closing parks and fields and urging residents to avoid outdoor activities during peak mosquito hours from dusk until dawn.
Please don't do this to our kids.
800 people signed a petition. Health Canada says the last reported human case of the disease in this country was in 2016. But health officials in the city of Ottawa say a horse there recently tested positive. So they're encouraging residents to use insect repellent, wear light-colored long pants and long sleeves, make sure windows and doors have screens, and remove or empty standing water sites around your home. The virus has no cure or vaccine for humans, but Canadians shouldn't panic, says this expert.
Outbreaks of this particular disease in the United States and in New England seems to be only very small handfuls of cases.
Canada's public health agency monitors mosquito-borne diseases, but it says unlike West Nile virus, human cases of eastern equine encephalitis don't have to be reported to the agency, and there's no formal surveillance system in place. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Still to come, a miniature masterpiece. We'll meet the Navy veteran promoting unity through his art. That's next. people in Vancouver's Dunbar neighbourhood are still dealing with the aftermath of the construction site fire from earlier this month. But unfortunately, this experience was not new for them. Last year in October, a fire broke out at West 41st and East Boulevard, where residents were displaced and at least 4 businesses were destroyed. That's where our Ali Patargay met up with Vancouver Fire Chief Karen Fry to talk about what makes communities susceptible to fires.
So, Chief, if we go around this neighborhood, a good portion of these buildings have aged a lot, and this neighborhood has seen their fair share of fires over the years. So what makes certain communities more vulnerable to structure fires?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that make communities vulnerable. One is about the residents, people that are living within the community, so their behaviors. But then again, it's about the age of the building. They don't necessarily have all the life and fire safety equipment put into them. Many of these buildings might not have sprinklers in them. We now have a building code within the City of Vancouver that requires all of our buildings to be sprinklered. Many of these buildings won't have working sprinkler systems in them. So the age and the infrastructures, we have many old areas in the City of Vancouver. And when we get a fire into, potentially into the side walls, it creates this vacuum, and it's a big open space. We're seeing that a lot in our older neighborhoods, where we call them void spaces, and we're chasing the fire, and they just keep spreading. And you think you've got it, and it's moved on through the path of least resistance. So we see a lot of that. You know, even today when we look at some of these buildings here, they're boarded up. We have a bunch of cardboard sitting here. That's a fire risk, right?
Do you think the fire code rules are enough to prevent these fires? Should be updated?
Well, you know, the fire code's always changing, but it only kind of reverts back to the age of when they were built. Of course, there's some buildings that we would like to see have updated systems in place, like fire alarm systems, especially in our residential buildings.
The last annual report put out by the Vancouver Fire Service, it said that there were 4,300 fires that crews had to tend to, and it increased by 10%, I believe, in 2023. So how are crews and firefighting resources managing all of this volume?
Yeah, we continually seen such an increase, and I think even this year to date, we're seeing the property and the dollar value loss just skyrocket because they're bigger fires. While we may have a fire, that 4,300 fires include all of our outdoor fires. So if this caught on fire and didn't cause any damage to the building, that would be considered an outdoor fire, or something that's a bushfire type of thing. Once it hits a building and causes damage to that building, we have nearly 800 fires a year in our building. So it's like 2 a day in our City of Vancouver. So when we talk about resources, we need to continually build up resources.
How much work do you think needs to be done in order to minimize fire hazards overall in a community?
Yeah, I think prevention's key, right? We always talk about the importance of public education and prevention. We are fantastic at reaction, like responding to an emergency and putting a fire out. But our goals is to actually reduce the number of fires. If you're a business owner or you're leasing a building, to make sure that you've had your systems checked and tested, as you are required to do under the fire code. But it really is about safe practices too, right? And we can all be safer.
Darius Madavi is back with another look at the weather. And Darius, the question, I think, for everyone, are we ever going to see the sun again?
Yes, summer is back starting tomorrow. Lots of sunshine for most people on the coast, then in the interior soon to follow on Wednesday, but still some showers and thunderstorms possible tomorrow if you are in the interior. So for now, we're seeing that rain track into much of the province. If we zoom in here, a lot of that is focused on the coast, the more southern part of Vancouver Island, although really just a few streams of it pretty much across the board, and then coming in bringing some decent rain to Vancouver, which we can see right now outside. Now, let's focus on Vancouver for a second. We do have another 24 hours or so of rainfall coming here. Or sorry, not 24 hours, another 6 to 12 hours or so of rainfall coming here. Clearing up for the morning, maybe a few showers lingering into the morning, but then we are done and we are dry for really the foreseeable future. Now, we're going to have some decent accumulation still over the next few hours. We've already gotten a decent amount of rain in some of these places. So in total, we're probably looking at between 10 to 40 millimeters of rain in total. You can see at those higher elevations in the Alpine. That's what we're looking at, seeing most of that rain. If we zoom out to the rest of the island, the rest of the south coast, still some decent accumulations for the island and up the sea to sky. But generally across the board, we've mostly dried out compared to what we were looking at this past weekend. So still a little bit more rain on the way, but generally calming down across the province. Now, we're going to see that precipitation track in. It lingers in the interior tomorrow, but then starts to clear up. After that, maybe just a little bit more rain tracking into the northwest. But generally, again, getting pretty dry. We've got a ridge of high pressure building in, going to bring us some sunshine. In terms of those temperatures, they're going to fall again tomorrow. Big cold front sweeps through, drops those temperatures. Our lows especially going to be pretty low, maybe 7 degrees for Kelowna tomorrow night, and then starting to track back up. But before they can shoot back up, some snow coming in for the province. You can see it coming to the coast mountains and over to the Rockies, and that's because of those really low lows. Freezing levels dropping to about 2,000 meters before they shoot back up as we get into Wednesday. So not going to last too long, but, you know, bit of a hint of towards the end of summer, unfortunately. Now, we have some more rain and thunderstorms coming across the province. This is probably overstating the amount of rain, but in the south, it does look like we're going to have quite a stormy and wet day. Here on the coast, again, the sun is going to be coming out throughout the day. And in Vancouver, over the next few days, again, a little bit of cloud left tomorrow, maybe some early morning showers, but generally should be pretty dry. And then lots of sunshine in the forecast, Michelle.
Love to see that.
Oh, yeah. Now, it's Monday, so let's take a deep breath.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Darius, I understand you have some positive news to tell us about global maternal mortality rates.
Yes, and so this segment is mostly about highlighting some of the things that you don't often see in the news. And this is one of those things that is a really long-term trend. It takes a long time for it to change, but it has been changing. And so we don't hear about it a lot because things tend to be covered when they're a big event, right? So globally, over the last 50 years or so, maternal mortality has decreased incredibly. This is the number of maternal deaths by globally. But if we look at the rate of maternal mortality, also has been declining quite a bit. Once this loads in, there we go. The rate of maternal mortality also declining. So just by any metric, really, we're seeing that decline, but this could just be global. What about if we break it down by region? We really see the same thing. It's the same trend. This is a much longer data set, so it really countries jump in once they have the data available to us. So Finland, for instance, has a very long data set available, but as these countries jump in, you can see that no matter where they are, the rate declines really quickly over the last 50 to 100 years or so. So really, no matter where you are, we're seeing this rate decline. And this is a really tragic situation that we've seen improvement in very consistently over a long period of time. No matter what country you look at, that's what we're seeing. So if we were to say, if we had maternal mortality at the rate we have in the past, we would have 1.26 million maternal deaths per year. Instead, what we do have nowadays is only 300,000. And if we could have every country in the world have the same access to healthcare and the same rate of maternal mortality that we have here in first world countries and in the best healthcare, we would have only 11,000 maternal deaths per year globally. So a long way to go, but we've also come a long way, Michelle.
Very interesting. Thank you, Darius.
Thank you.
A Navy veteran in Cloverdale has completed a replica of the SS Komagata Maru. He told CBC News how it took him 300 hours to complete the project.
My name is Yvonne Lehoux. I served for 30 years in the Royal Canadian Navy. I retired from the Navy in 2006, and I had to find something to do with my time. And one day I was going through the Second World War Canadian ships, and I saw this ship called the HMCS Thetford Mines. It was built in 1944. I decided to build it from scratch. Once I finished building it, I says, I got to build another one.
And end of 2020, I just bought the lot next door to him, so we became neighbors, so we start hanging out. And then when I saw him, one of the weekends he was working on his ship, and we were talking about history, and then he started asking me, hey, what's your history? And The only ship I could think about was Komagata Maru. I asked him if we can do it, and then we start Googling about it, and that's how it all started.
This was fun. This one took it, I think it took me the longest to build. After trials and trials, I was able to finally find the place where I could get documentation from it. Because this ship was originally built in Glasgow, Scotland in 1890. And then the ship was bought by Japan, and they renamed it the Komagata Maru. I was able to trace back down to what the Komagata Maru was named prior, and I finally found it in the Lloyd's Registry, which is like a ship database kind of agency that keeps track of all the ships that have been built since the 1800s all the way to the present. To build the entire ship, it took about 350 to 400 hours. To find out that there was no other models of the Komagata Maru out there, this would give me the opportunity to sort of bring or unite, you know, the different communities that we have together. That was a no-brainer to build it. You're very welcome, my friend. And there's your ship, my friend.
Still to come, a daring 102-year-old celebrates her birthday in style, 7,000 feet in the air. That's next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
On September 14th, celebrate Indigenous community, culture, and spirit at the 3rd annual Come Toward the Fire, a free outdoor festival where CBC is proud to be invited and return as the exclusive media partner. For more information, visit cometowardthefire.com and join CBC's Dan Burrett on September 24th at Dakota's signature fundraising event, the Team Trivia Challenge, supporting Literacy Month in BC.
Celebrating a birthday is usually a piece of cake for most people, but not for Manette Bailey.
This British woman decided to set herself a high goal for turning 102 years old. It meant jumping out of a plane from 7,000 feet to become Britain's oldest skydiver.
And it's not just for the thrill of it. She's using the jump to raise money for charities that are dear to her.
Bailey served with the Women's Royal Navy service during the Second World War, but she says, despite having married a paratrooper, this is her first time skydiving.
Very cool.
I know. Are you going to do that for your 102nd birthday next year?
I was going to suggest you could do it for your next birthday. We've got a few years to go till 102.
One of us does. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And I'll be right here with your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.